Okay, sweet. Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm an artist and front-end engineer based here in Berlin. I don't public speak a ton, so I'm kind of nervous, so be nice to me. I work at Clue, which is a female health company and period tracker app. That's right, a period tracker app. So I need to warn you that this talk will include mentions of things like periods and biology and anatomy. So buckle the heck up, it's about to get real. But first, I have a question for you all. How many of you have read an article in the last year about climate change? And how many of you can remember the title of any single one of those articles that you read? So I can remember, there's one person, two people, 1.5 people. But I can only remember one. It's from the New York Times, and it's titled, "How Much Hotter is Your Hometown Than When You Were Born?" And the reason I remember this is that it shows the impact of climate change in this really personalized and interactive way. It's a really compelling piece of journalism. So basically you input your hometown and your birth year in the article and in the form at the top. And as you scroll through it, it tells you how much warmer your hometown has gotten since you were born, how many hot days per year it has now, how many more you'll expect in the future, and so forth. And then as you scroll down, it also compares the temperatures in your hometown with that of other cities across the world and illustrates how climate change is affecting those places as well. And New York Times is far from the only publication doing work like this. If any of you know The Pudding, it's this really cool website that does entirely interactive journalism. And in this article titled "Population Mountains," they demonstrate how much more useful population heat maps would be if they were in 3D. So as you scroll through, it transitions from a 2D map into a 3D one. Oh, I timed that perfectly. Which on the one hand kind of adds a bit of delight and to the reader experience. But on the other, it also helps the information they're conveying really sink home. And really this is starting to happen all over. There's this kind of movement right now among online publications to make their content interactive because it not only increases reader engagement, it also kind of brings the information home to the readers and really makes it sink in. So, okay, let's get back to Clue. So I'll give you a little background on what we do so that the rest of this talk kind of makes sense. Clue's first product is a period tracker app, which is used by over 10 million people around the world to track their symptoms and learn about patterns in their reproductive health. So historically, our website has just been a landing page for the app. But a year ago, we relaunched it as essentially an encyclopedia for women and people with cycles. So we had previously just had this Tumblr blog where we posted our health and science content. But with the website relaunch, we put all of our content together in one organized place where people could more easily get the information they wanted. So my role in this project is primarily technical. I helped build out the website as a React app using Contentful as our content platform. And at this point, I want to point out the really awesome cartoon in the middle that my friend made for me for these talks. I'm really happy I get to use it here. Okay, so here's an example of some of our encyclopedic content. This is actually one of our most popular articles, which explains what the significance of period blood color is. And spoiler alert, by the way, it's not that significant. So we have tons of articles like these. And lately we've been thinking that our readers might be better served by content that does more showing and less telling. So that is interactive content, which really gets the point home since so many people are visual learners. So here's another one of our top 10 most popular articles. I told you it was going to get real. So we thought that this article was a great opportunity to use interactivity to better educate our readers. This article goes into detail about the anatomical structure of the clitoris, but the article is made entirely of text. So we thought we could do better. We thought, what if as you scroll through the article and you read about the different parts of the anatomy, an illustration could highlight the parts being discussed, so you could almost have an interactive textbook as you scroll through. So let's jump back a second. So if you're not already familiar with the editor view of Contentful, here's what it looks like. In our case, we have a content type called article with a markdown body field. So of course we have a bunch of text in our article, but the question is, how do we get a plain text field to include interactivity? So our first attempt at this was to extend markdown syntax using the concept of shortcodes. So basically this meant inserting an HTML comment in the middle of the article body with special syntax inside of it that refers to an interactive piece. So our markdown renderer would pick up that HTML comment and render a custom React component in its place. And that way, writers could insert some interactive widget in the middle of an article and control where it appears based on where they put the HTML comment. And that worked okay, but it wasn't great. because first of all, it's kind of brittle. You know, if you accidentally delete, you know, the exclamation mark after the first bracket, it'll just show it in plain text, you know. It's also hard, the interactive portion had all hard-coded copy. So if they wanted to make a change to the text in the interactive portion, they would literally have to email me and let me know. Like you can see in the next comment, it says, no, email me if this text needs to change. So yeah, and then lastly, of course, any changes to the text required a code deploy. So yeah, not really an ideal situation for a content team whose whole job is to be able to like constantly make updates and edits and stuff to the content. So I was thinking I want to do sort of a better model for interactive content. And to do that, I had to sort of think about like, what are my goals with this project? Like what am I really trying to achieve? And I identified 5 goals that I thought would be a pretty good outcome for this. The first one is writers should be able to make changes to text without waiting for a code deploy. Self-explanatory. Content can be translated using Contentful's existing localization functionality, including the text in the middle of the interactive portions. The setup shouldn't be brittle. So that is, I want to avoid things like telling our writers, make sure you include these things in this specific order, since, you know, if they happen to change that, it could break. And, you know, I don't want to have inline HTML because, again, if a writer accidentally deletes part of a tag, it completely breaks the whole thing. Fourth, this is pretty related, writers shouldn't have to deal with any code. So ideally, the whole interface should be pretty intuitive and easy to use for non-technical folks. Lastly, writers should be able to preview their changes and get quick feedback. So as I was learning I was thinking about how to do this, I started reading the New York Times, their open source blog. It's called open.nytimes.com. I really recommend it. And they have a very detailed blog post about their text editor. It talks about how all of their articles are just a series of nodes. So paragraphs, pull quotes, images, captions, headings, all these things, everything is just a node in this text editor. And on the front end, of course, they can just render different node types however they'd like. So there you see well, I guess you see an article, not a text editor on the left. You see the article view, and on the right is the JSON structure describing it. I also got connected with an engineer there, and he said that for the interactive pieces, they simply created this new node type called an interactive node, which it had a field that referenced the interactive code that they had written for that specific article. And what that looked like was they would create a new node in the middle of their text editor, just like a paragraph tag or a header, and insert it into the middle of the article. And then their renderer for the node in their front-end code would pick up that hook, that JSON object, and render whatever interactive content they designed for it. So this made me ask myself, how could I accomplish something similar in Contentful? So instead of just a long string of markdown text, what if I could have a structured JSON object representing my text as essentially a series of nodes, just like New York Times did? Now, of course, I was kind of discouraged thinking about this because I was like, the New York Times has a staff of who knows how many front-end engineers just building their text editor. So I couldn't expect to have anything even close to that for Clue. But then, to my utter delight and surprise, Contentful plug here, Contentful announced they're releasing this rich text feature, which some of you may have heard of. And basically the way rich text works is very similarly to the way the New York Times text editor works. So you can see on the left in the Contentful web app, you get this WYSIWYG text editor. What you see is what you get, text editor, where you can compose rich text with formatting and so forth without having to deal with the special syntax required by Markdown. These are screenshots, by the way, from the Contentful docs on rich text. Then when you request rich text content from the Contentful API on your website, it represents your text as a series of blocks in the form of this JSON object that can be like deeply nested inside of each other. So again, sort of like with the New York Times, a paragraph, heading, quotation, all these different things are represented as a node in this giant JSON structure that overall describes your content. And it allows a lot of flexibility. So instead of just composing text, you can actually insert entries from other content types right in the middle of your text. So you can see here in the screenshot, there's this content type called block video right there in the middle. And it's been inserted directly into the rich text body. So I was thinking, man, I could just create custom content types for any interactive or custom content that I would need in the middle of an article, and then write React components that would render these content types the way that I want. So I'll take you through the model that I set up for this. So first I created a new content type and called it custom block. So it only has 3 fields. The name field references an actual React component name, so it's a machine name. Microcopies is a multi-reference field to the microcopy content type, which I'll get to in a second. And assets are all of the assets that the component needs, with the title of each asset set to a machine name that the custom block will refer to in the code. So let's zoom into the microcopies for a second. So the microcopy content type is simply a key value pair. So the key is a machine name referring to this piece of copy, kind of like what you might expect to see in a JSON object for translations or something. And the value is a long text field, which also can actually be marked down if you want. And by the way, the idea for microcopy came from this article, which I'd highly recommend. I think the author's name is Kristen Bauman. It goes into the reason for this kind of data model of microcopies and some useful ways of implementing it, which inspired my own microcopy content type. So, okay, we have this custom block model, and we can insert it into the middle of an article's rich text field. So let's dive into the code and see what it takes to render all of this. So first, we'll install the rich text to React NPM module. This module was specifically made for Contentful's rich text feature. It was actually just announced, I think, in the Contentful community Slack recently. And what it does is it recursively loops over the JSON object of a rich text field and creates a React component tree for the whole thing. Of course, it also lets you override its default renderers for different node types. So, for example, if you want to use styled components or something to make a styled paragraph tag and return that, you can pass that styled component into the config for rich text to React, and it will use that rather than just a normal paragraph tag. So that's what we do in our code base. So as you can see, we have styled versions of like many of the different node types that you would find in a rich text document. But those first three renderers on lines 26 to 28 are the more interesting ones. So let's zoom in on that. Especially the first one, it specifies the renderer for embedded entries. So the renderer itself just checks the content type of the embedded entry, which is like that block video thing that we saw in the screenshot earlier. And then it delegates to a React component that knows how to render it. So meaning that if it's a custom block entry, it will delegate to the custom block React component. And here is my custom block component. I highlighted kind of the important bits. So it doesn't do a lot on its own. It just imports a hard-coded registry of all the different custom blocks that I've created, and then looks in that registry for a component with the name of the custom block's name field that we saw earlier, and renders it if it exists. I'll go back and review this in a sec. So if you're getting lost, don't worry. This is the registry itself. So this maps machine names of custom blocks to an asynchronously loaded component. We're using code splitting here so that the custom blocks are kind of split off. And by the way, if you're like me, you might feel a little weird about this registry since it hard codes elements that are tied to specific records in Contentful. So for example, you can see I created a custom block for the clitoris article on line 6, I guess, the last one there. And you might think, I should just simply upload standalone JavaScript and CSS assets to Contentful itself and add them to the page on demand. And this did feel a little funny to me at first, but I was talking with a colleague and he pointed out that most of the components in the code that I need to build these interactive pieces already exist in my code base. So it wouldn't make much sense to, for example, make an entirely separate repo just for these interactive pieces when I have so much of the code that I need already in this main repo. I might as well just include them in my main React app repo and have them load async when they're needed. Otherwise, loading them separately as standalone apps would result in a much bigger file payload because they need to be built with all of their dependencies and everything that are already included in the main bundle. So for now, I'm pretty happy with the solution. Anyway, going back to the custom block component. So as I mentioned earlier, we grab a React component from the custom block registry based on its name, and then we render it. And you'll notice that we're also passing the entire custom block Contentful entry into the component that we loaded from the registry on line 16, this bottom one. So this gives the component access to all of the microcopies and assets and everything that are associated with that custom block in Contentful. So then that component itself uses the machine names of the microcopies to determine which pieces of text should show up where. I'll show you how that looks. I won't go into too much of our code, but here's an example from that clitoris article of how the microcopy could be used. So there's like 4 different lines here where you can see that the alt text of several images is being set from the microcopies, from this microcopies object, which is basically like a key value pair. And that means that our editors can go and edit the microcopies for things as small as like an alt text for an image. Okay, so hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you too much. Let's just quickly recap what we just saw. First, rich text to React module goes through the rich text tree and converts nodes to their corresponding React components. Second, for nodes that are embedded custom blocks, the custom block React component is loaded and rendered. Third, the custom block component takes the name of the custom block entry and looks it up in its hard-coded registry of custom blocks. And if it finds a component, it renders the component that was linked in the registry. So that was kind of a bit dense. I can take a second if you guys have any questions, if any of you have any questions right now, or should I keep going? Okay, keep going. Cool. So moving on, let's actually go through the process of creating an article with this setup. So as you remember, this is the old way of doing it, a markdown body field with this HTML shortcode in the middle. And here's what it looks like. Here's how you can kind of like compare how it looks like with rich text. Rich text is on the right. So with rich text, we now have that WYSIWYG editor, but more importantly, we can embed our custom block entry right in the middle of the text. So it's much better than this HTML shortcode on the left, much less like brittle. So let's click on the edit button and see what the custom block record looks like. So now we'll see all of the micro copies. So first there's the name at the top, the machine name. And then we can see all the micro copies that are associated with this article. So let's go one level deeper and click the edit button on one of those. And you see here the alt text for a single image. So again, our editors and writers can go directly into this and make changes to even the smallest bits of text in an interactive page. And when you put it all together, once you set up all the micro copies and the custom block and everything, the article is ready to go. So this is the article that we were talking about earlier. We're currently only showing the interactive content on mobile at the moment, so I'll just show you what it looks like on a mobile device. So yeah, we now have this custom block in the middle of the article. The parts of the text that it's scrolling past underneath are actually microcopies themselves. And as they scroll past, it triggers the animation to switch to the next portion. It's highlighting the word that it's, the word and the illustration are highlighted to show what you're reading. I'll just let it finish. I don't want to cut it short because I'm like really proud of this. Anyway, so okay, I'll show you a couple more examples of pages using custom blocks on our site. So this one is our jobs page. In Contentful, we have this page content type that for the purpose of this talk basically works the same as our article content type. So it also has a rich text body field, which can have custom blocks inserted into it. So for the jobs page, pretty much all of it is custom block content. The screenshot you see here contains a list of job openings, and these come from an API endpoint provided by our job board provider. So obviously that requires custom code. But yeah, same approach. I just created a job listing custom block that gets rendered, in the middle of the article body, and the apply now and full time and those things are all micro copies that can be edited by our recruiting staff. And probably my favorite example of using custom blocks is our app download page. So as you scroll down the page, it triggers this animation of of our app that's built using After Effects and then exported using Lottie. If you're interested in this, I can tell you about it afterward. It's really cool. So this might seem like a super kind of complex or very custom coded page, and it is. But all of the text on this page is in Contentful and can be edited by our marketing team without a coding deploy, which I think is pretty cool, a code deploy. Thank you, whoever that was. So earlier I mentioned the goals that I had when implementing interactivity in rich text. So now is probably a good time to revisit them and see how we did. Also, I'm realizing I should have made that headline be #goals, but anyway. Number one, check. They can make changes via the microcopies without a code deploy. Number two, also check. Microcopies can be localized. Number three, mostly good, although I would say that the fact that writers could accidentally change one of the keys to the microcopies is kind of a risk. Ideally, they shouldn't really be able to edit the keys at all, just the values, but we're in better shape than before when it was just HTML tags and comments. Number four, again, mostly good. I do think of machine names as being a bit code-ish, but other than that, they can insert custom blocks into text using the native Contentful interface, and again, don't have to worry about the shortcode syntax. Number five, check. Writers can edit the microcopies and then use the Contentful content preview button to see how their changes look in staging. So overall, I'd say we did pretty well. That said, I do see some pretty clear areas for improvement. Number one, I think it'd be great to have a clearer UI and easier UI for editing microcopy. So Contentful does have this feature for bulk editing referenced entries, but even that isn't exactly what I want since writers can still edit the key field, which is kind of risky. So I might want to develop like a UI extension or something for editing microcopies, unless any of you has an idea of something like this already exists. That'd be great to hear, or if you're working on it. Number two, so while the microcopies are indeed translatable, sending individual microcopies to translators and then copy pasting them back into the microcopy interface is obviously a bit tedious. So I'd like to set up some tooling or something that can, for example, auto-generate a JSON file that our writers can use to upload to our translation provider. And lastly, I'd really love to hear all of your thoughts on the solution and what could be better. So please grab me after the talk and share any thoughts you have. I'm all ears. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So this is where we're at right now with rendering rich text and where we'd like to go in the future. This is my contact info. I'm Jesse Pino pretty much everywhere on the web, including .com. So look me up and send any thoughts or feedback you might have. And by the way, Clue is hiring a lot of engineers right now, including for web. So if you think you'd be interested in working on the stuff that I just showed you, come talk to me afterward. And also I have Clue stickers, including uterus stickers, and Clue branded condoms, and Clue pens. So get your swag. All right, thank you. I should have put them out somewhere. I can put them, is it okay if I put them here? And I need to mute this. Oh yeah, I was like so ready to take off. Yes. Okay, so the question was, what does microcopy mean? So basically that, I'd really recommend that blog post that I linked, is bit.ly/contentful-microcopy. It's the idea of like putting all these little pieces of copy that always require code changes or code deploys to change into Contentful instead, and then loading them kind of on demand. So you could even, like in the article that I linked, they even like put the little like placeholder text for forms and help texts and tooltips, all of that into Contentful, which we don't actually do on the website for that level of stuff, but it works pretty well for pages that need to be updated, especially when they're kind of dynamic. Yeah. So you're gonna do form generation yet? Sorry? We're not using microcopy for forms. No. I could see that happening, and like if we had an article like that climate change one from the New York Times, and you have like a field where you enter your hometown and your date of birth and stuff, I could see that if there's like help text for that form, you might want to put that in a microcopy because it's literally part of the article. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks.